Hey everyone, TechRich here, and I'm here to tell you about the one poll that got 2016 right and their projections for the 2020 election. And that poll's name is the Trafalgar Group. So let's dive in. Back in 2016, almost every poll had Hillary Clinton winning over the newcomer in the political world, Donald J. Trump. 538 had Clinton victory at a 71.4% chance of victory, and the New York Times had an 85% chance of a Clinton victory. And with that much of a spread, that's why Hillary won, of course. Wait, that's not right. Trump won. And with 304 electoral votes versus Clinton's 227 electoral votes. So what happened? Why did all these polls get their results wrong? Well, the Trafalgar Group believes they have the answer. You see, Trafalgar is a newcomer in the polling world as they just started for the 2016 election. But they stood out as the newcomer because they have been cited as the only, or one of the only, depending on the source, polls to correctly show Trump winning in Pennsylvania and Michigan, along with being one of the only polls to have Trump winning overall. And they attribute their success in polling to their secret sauce in gathering data. So what is this secret sauce? Well, here's the information I was able to gather about it. Overall, the sauce consists of 3 unique approaches to polling. The first is that they make their questionnaire shorter than the competition to get opinions of people who would normally not participate in polls. And that makes sense. Many people live busy lives, and no one really wants to be on the phone for 15 to 30 minutes for a poll. As such, they probably receive data from people who are normally not going to answer polls. The second part is that the Trafalgar Group takes into account the social desirability bias, as they call it, in order to get what voters' true feelings are. This bias rests on the opinion that people feel like their answers are being judged by the pollster, and thus give answers that the pollster wants to hear, and not the person's real feelings. To combat this bias, the Trafalgar Group uses a variety of different polling methods, including the use of 2 proprietary digital methods that they don't share publicly to contact people to make them feel safer when responding. This method is also supposed to help conservatives respond more to polls because this group of people are more likely to refuse polls than their liberal counterparts. With taking into account this bias, they are able to get a better reflection on how groups of people are likely to act when voting in this election. The third part is that they target inactive voters. You see, voters can become inactive for various reasons, such as moving, their election mail being returned as undeliverable, and them not voting in the last 2 election cycles. And the latter point of not voting in the last 2 election cycles proved its importance in 2016. Many people who did not vote in the previous elections came out to vote in 2016, and this is a trend that we're also seeing in the 2020 election cycle. And speaking of the 2020 election, let's dive into their predictions for the 2020 election. For this video, we will be focusing in on the major and mild swing states that are likely to affect this election. For those who do not know, swing states are a result of the electoral college system, where only winning the overall plurality of a state's population matters, versus the popular system of voting, where the entire nation's population matters. As such, it is more important to flip certain states' population than to flip the whole nation's population towards your side. And so, the major swing states in this election are Ohio, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Arizona, Texas, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Some on this list are historical swing states like North Carolina and Florida, who have flipped recently, but the newest swing state in this list is Texas, which hasn't swung since Jimmy Carter. Then there are also mild swing states, which are states that are leaning more towards one side, but their votes are not determinate. These are Nevada, Montana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Missouri. And lastly, there are swing districts in 2 states that split their electoral vote by decisions made in a certain district. These are Nebraska District 2 and Maine District 2. And now that we got that out of the way, let's dive into the key battleground states and what the Trafalgar Group has to say about who will win the 2020 election. So, to begin, here's the scoreboard. The numbers already on the board reflect the amount of votes that Biden and Trump are very likely to win in this election. Using this data, Biden has 216 electoral votes and Trump has 112 electoral votes. And to claim victory, the winner needs 270 votes out of the total 538. So let's get started. The first state we are looking at is the state of Ohio. Here they have Donald Trump winning over Joe Biden, with Trump receiving 47.6% of the vote versus Biden's 43.9%. And just looking at the spread of 3.7%, it is a clear victory for Trump, as even if all the 3.6 undecided voters vote Biden, he will still lose. And so, with that, Trump will receive 18 electoral votes, bringing his total to a clean 130 electoral votes. The next major swing state is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So, this is a closer spread than Ohio, but it is still a Joe Biden victory with 47.4% of the vote versus 45.1% for Trump. As before, even with all the undecided votes going towards Trump, Trump would still fall short. So 20 electoral votes now go to Biden, bringing his total to 236. This is a significant win for Biden, as Hillary lost this state. Additionally, this data is even more useful, as the Trafalgar Group was the only pollster to correctly predict the Pennsylvania vote in 2016. Following Pennsylvania, there is the state of Iowa. You see, Trafalgar Group does not have a poll for them, but Trump won in 2016 by a landslide of 51.15% versus 41.74% for Clinton. So we will give Trump these 6 electoral votes, bringing his total to 136. After Iowa comes the state of Arizona. Here, there is another Trump victory with 47.8% of the vote versus Biden's 43.8%. And like Pennsylvania and Ohio, the undecided vote cannot save Biden. So Trump will receive 11 votes, making his total 147. With Arizona out of the way, next comes the state of Texas. Trump here has 49.4% of the vote versus 43.4% for Biden. And again, the undecided vote cannot help Biden. So Trump gets Texas and 38 electoral votes. So Trump now has 185. Next up on the list is the state of Georgia. Here, Trump receives 49.8% of the vote versus Biden's 43.3%. And like all other states before, the undecided vote cannot help Biden, so Trump has the clear victory. As a side note, from here on out, I'll just mention the undecided vote if it will affect the candidate. And so, with the win in Georgia giving Trump 16 votes, Trump just breaks the 200 mark and now has 201 and getting closer to Biden's lead of 236. Next is everyone's favorite swing state, Florida. For the people who do not know, the reason why Florida is so significant is it actually decided the 2000 election winner. And so, in Florida, Trump leads Biden 48.4% to 46.1%, giving Trump 29 electoral votes. This means Trump is 6 short of Biden, with Trump having 230 votes versus Biden's 236. And the last of the major swing states is North Carolina. Here, Trump leads Biden 48.8% to 46%. In earlier polling, the lead was much narrower, but the spread here is 2.8%. And so Trump will receive 15 votes, giving Trump 245. And with this state, Trump has now taken over the lead from Biden. So, with no clear winner after the major swing states, let's turn our attention to the mild swing states. The first of these is Nevada. The Trafalgar Group has no data on this state, but it has voted blue for the last 3 elections, so we will give the 6 electoral votes to Biden, making his total 242. After Nevada comes the state of Montana. Once again, the Trafalgar Group has no data on this state, but since the last time it swung was in 1992 for Bill Clinton, we will give their 3 electoral votes to Trump, making his total 248. Following Montana, let's go to another M state, Minnesota. This is a state with an extremely small spread, with Biden only having a 0.4% lead over Trump. And with 1.7% of voters undecided, this state could go either way, making it the first state on this list where the undecided vote is significant. But since Minnesota has voted blue since Carter, we will give 10 votes to Biden, but with an asterisk, making Biden's total 252 votes. Once again, Biden has the lead. Following Minnesota, we have the state of Wisconsin. We have a larger spread here than Montana, with Joe Biden leading 47.6% to Trump's 46.3%. However, we do have a large undecided vote, being 2.8%, that could side with Trump. So we will give these 10 votes to Biden, but with an asterisk, making Biden's total 262. He is now 8 votes away from winning the entire election. The next mild swing state in this election is a major one. This state is Michigan, and the Trafalgar Group was the only pollster to predict it flipping from blue to red for the first time since 1992. It was also a close flip, with 47.25% of the vote going to Trump and 47.03% of the vote to Clinton. For the 2020 election, Trafalgar has the spread a bit bigger with a 0.6 difference, with 46.5% of the vote going to Trump and 45.9% of the vote to Biden. But 2.0% are still undecided voters, so it could go either way. So with an asterisk, Trump receives 16 electoral votes, making his total 264, overtaking Biden by 2, and only 6 votes away from winning the entire 2020 election. And the last mild swing state is Missouri. Here, there is a clear Trump victory with 51.9% of the vote versus Biden's 41.2% of the vote. That gives Trump 10 electoral votes, making his total 274, and thus becoming the winner of the 2020 presidential election. Now, if you have done the math, we only have 536 electoral votes accounted for, not 538. That is due to the swing districts in Maine and Nebraska each having 1 vote. For these 2 districts, the Trafalgar Group does not have any data. However, they both voted for Trump in 2016, so we will add their votes to Trump's numbers. And so the final tally is 276 Trump, 262 Biden, making this election one of the closest since Gore and Bush. But before we call it a Trump victory, let's remember the states with an asterisk: Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. If Michigan flips to Biden, he wins the election. However, if Michigan and either Wisconsin or Minnesota flips, Biden will lose. Anyways, this has been a look at the 2020 election predictions using the pollster's Trafalgar Group's data. This is in no way reflects what will happen in 2020. Given that, it's always interesting to see what a newcomer brings into the rather stale political polling world. I do want to make one point about the stats given in this video. You see, the figures Trafalgar gave might not be accurate reflections on the population that they wish to represent. Overall, they do a great job of having around 1,000 people as their sample size, using a 95% confidence interval, and having a margin of error between 2 to 3%, all of which are the norms of the political polling world. But the issue here is what plagues many political polls, and that is taking into account the confidence interval and margin of error. You see, for those not familiar, a 95% confidence interval means that if the poll was recreated 100 times, 5 of those cases would be outside the margin of error. With this info, we can find that 1 out of every 20 polls will not contain the true value. As such, there could be a sampling error with the information given, making the results inaccurate. And speaking of margin of error, most if not all the polls cited in this video had about a 3% margin of error. This means each candidate had their own margin of error. And so, to determine the real spread between the two candidates, we need to calculate the maximum and the minimum spread. Take for example Florida. With rounding Florida's numbers, Trafalgar has Trump receiving 48% of the vote and Biden receiving 46%. With a 3% margin of error for each candidate, Trump's highest percentage of the Florida vote would be 51% and his lowest would be 45%. Biden's highest would be 49% and his lowest would be 43%. And if Trump received his lowest, but Biden received his highest, Biden would win Florida with a 4% spread. But if Trump received his highest and Biden received his lowest, Trump would win with an 8% spread. As one can see, the race looks a lot closer in Florida, with the possibility of Biden winning by 4% of the vote. Or it looks like a landslide win for Trump if he receives 8% of the vote. And Florida is not an outlier. In fact, out of all the data I gave you, only 3 states contain a lead outside of the margin of error that contains a high level of confidence that the lead is large enough to not be a sampling error. Those states are Georgia, Texas, and Missouri, which according to Trafalgar's data, including their margin of error, should go to Trump. And lastly, I want to note people's opinion do change throughout the election. While creating this video, Trafalgar polled Pennsylvania again, and the results now have Trump winning. So this data I've given you may be out of date when you're looking at it. So make sure to head over to the trafalgargroup.org to see any new polls that have come out. And so, in conclusion, we can see that the 2020 election is way too close to call. But hopefully, this video gave you some insight into the Trafalgar Group and some insight into the political polling world overall. This has been a Tech Rich video.